What's up, guys? Chuck and Chris here on a Tuesday night to bring you another Underdog Fantasy Occupy Fantasy Best Ball stream. Chris, how we doing?
Chuck, we're doing fantastic. I am excited to talk about Best Ball Mania with you again tonight here on Underdog and introduce, I think, we've talked about this, I guess, like a little bit during contests, but one thing you brought to the table in our staff chat before we went live tonight is talking a little bit more, I guess, intelligently tonight about combinations of players we're getting in our drafts. And I know you were looking at your combinations for putting you on the spot here. I think it was almost 100. Was it 143 total drafts on Underdog at this point you have? And you were basically looking at the draft board from all those teams, not necessarily teams you yourself drafted, just like as an example, in each of those drafts, what like the most common players selected alongside like Christian McCaffrey at the first pick was. And I assume you have more data, et cetera, on like CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, and what have you, right?
Yeah. So this is cut off.
And this is obviously a tool. Again, no free ads, I guess, but free ad here. Spikeweek.com. This is another one of those tools that you use a little bit. Obviously, you use it and I don't. Maybe I should change that, admittedly. But this looks like a really powerful kind of visualizer tool here to see what players are most commonly selecting. And we're filtered for Christian McCaffrey here. I think it makes sense, Chuck, that the players on the left side of the screen here, because I believe this is roughly by ADP, right, are going to be most commonly owned with Christian McCaffrey because they're most commonly there when you pick like 24th, 25th, et cetera, so on and so forth. So kind of interesting to see some of those things that are popping on the right side of the screen, like Brock Purdy, for example. That doesn't seem to be like something I would assume a lot of correlation on, although I guess obviously from sheer ADP anyway, I mean, being on the same team, it makes sense. So maybe that's not the best example. A little bit of a darker color on you got Trevor Lawrence there. That's kind of interesting. Do we have a playoff correlation there with the Jaguars? In other words, kind of trying to introduce the subject here. Why don't you take it away and talk about what you wanted to share with the people here?
Yeah, I just think there's a lot of interesting things to note here. Brian and I, if you've watched our streams, we've done a lot of talk about combos, and Chris and I have as well. And it's just interesting to see it. Like, it's really, I think it's just a lot easier to visualize it when you actually have the visual aid like this. And I mean, you can see, so out of the, I don't know why it only says 130, but figure 130 teams that have Christian McCaffrey of all the drafts that I've been in. So this is what my opponents are doing. It's very heavily weighted towards the left part of the board, which makes sense in line with ADP. And so I'm wondering just what kind of advantages we can get from, reaching in ADP a little bit more. Like, not a single person has taken Tank Dell on a CMC team. One person's taken Zay Flowers. Two people have taken Josh Allen. This is a week 17 correlation, isn't it? Detroit, San Francisco, and only four people have taken Sam Laporta with Christian McCaffrey. And so just, I don't know, like the quarterbacks are fairly kind of spread out, but just there's a lot of edge in drafting from the right side of the board. And obviously the running backs are going to be lesser owned just because you have Christian McCaffrey. There's going to be less running backs drafted overall. But I have one for CeeDee Lamb here too. And you can see the running backs are drafted a little bit more, actually a little bit more evened out than I would expect. But it's the same kind of thing. The right side of the board is just not even, it's not drafted nearly as much as these guys on the left side board. Like Devonta Smith and Devin Achane are on such a high percentage of CeeDee Lamb teams. And it's not like so Devonta Smith, 32% of CeeDee Lamb teams versus Stephon Diggs, 6%. Devonta Smith is not 5-1 to be a better pick than Stephon Diggs this year.
That's your week 17 correlation though, right? With the Eagles. I think that's primarily what's driving that. But yeah, you're absolutely correct to point out, there's other players there, Metcalf, Neighbors, Cup, like all equally could outscore Smith. And, maybe to some degree, yes, we preach, obviously correlation for that game environment bump that you get when you get to the finals. But I mean, I guess this, Chuck, could be an argument for maybe we've as a community kind of over-indexed a little bit for that when you have a great player like Cooper Kupp right next to Devontae Smith. And I would say it's definitely at least a coin flip, in terms of which way that's going to go in terms of who's going to be the better player to have on your rosters this year. And obviously Smith being drafted, I mean, that's like you said, like an 8-1 clip on him. So definitely seems like the odds are not really on the side of how it actually projects to play out there.
And then I'll just show one last one real quick from the right side of the board, Garrett Wilson. But the same thing. These guys on the left are just not being drafted in combos with these guys on the right side of the board. And especially you can see here, Garrett Wilson's a late wide receiver. Like these running backs are getting drafted with him so heavily in the middle rounds. And I don't think it's wrong. But I don't know, just you can kind of see the combos here.
Yeah, so we've been kind of going over combos here for I guess the first 5 to 10 minutes of the show here, and I guess if we were to clip this right, and we were to make this like a little bit of a standalone kind of short video about like attacking drafting best ball contests with these visuals for these three example players: Garrett Wilson, Christian McCaffrey, CD Lamb, Chuck. What's your main takeaway from going through this and kind of like looking at this data? And what are you going to be trying to do moving forward based off of what you've learned here?
So one thing that I've always been doing anyway is if a guy is falling, even in the middle round, say 8, 9, 10 spots in ADP, I'm almost always taking him if the position makes sense for my team, just because I'm creating kind of a unique combo and I'm getting ADP value at the same time. And so now that I'm 600 plus drafts in, especially in my slow drafts, I did this earlier. I took the time to go through and just see what combos my opponents are not drafting as much. And then I took those players. And a lot of what my opponents are doing lines up with what I'm doing because it's a lot based on ADP. But just don't be afraid to deviate from ADP, I guess. Reach even like 12 picks. Like I took Amari Cooper at the
Right.
25th pick here because no one had Amari Cooper with Christian McCaffrey. And it's like I reached 20 picks on him. But if I get the only combo of Amari Cooper and CMC in the finals, then I'm going to be feeling pretty great about that. So
Yeah.
just an
And I
example of
think
something you can do.
this is a really, I think, powerful example of like the higher level thinking of the game theory here. And now that you have, and by the way, we appreciate this, that you're willing to kind of put on the table the things you've learned from your portfolio, which I would say is absolutely this data, a representative sample of, what the field at large is doing in every contest. You get a Garrett Wilson, Jahmyr Gibbs kind of at the end of the first round. Chuck, I guess just kind of to tie a bow around it, you already said this, but being willing to reach 12 to 15 picks to get those low owned, like Garrett Wilson, Devin Achane, Malik Neighbors combos, stuff like that, is definitely what we're a little more interested in here, right? So really awesome. Really happy that you shared that with everybody tonight. And, we'll talk more about this obviously as we go through a draft.
So I'm going to jump in a BBM for anyone that wants to join us in this draft. Let's see. Last note I want to make about this, because this is just really, really pops when you see it. So Garrett Wilson, 19% Marvin Harrison pairs, 18% Drake London. These guys are all under 5%. Olave, IU, Collins, Adams, Waddle, Samuel, Mike Evans, 1%. And these guys might be better picks than Drake London and Marvin Harrison. And it just seems like such an advantage to, this is the easiest way to take advantage of this information, I think, with these late round 10 through 12 picks. Just pick anyone else in the second round who doesn't line up with ADP necessarily. And then, so we're waiting for 5 more people. Take a look at the ADP changes from the past week. Demarcus Robinson, Noah Fant, Demario Douglas has been on here. Elijah Mitchell's been moving up. Brian Robinson, Brandon Cooks, Chuba Hubbard, Rashi Rice, and Kobe Parkinson are the guys that have moved more than 2 spots. Anything surprising or anything you want to dive into a little bit more here? Oh, you might be muted.
Not might be. I definitely was, because my son came in to say goodnight to me. So, anyways, shout out to all the parents out there watching the show. Appreciate that. Let me get your request out of here. So, ask me again. I forget what we were talking about.
ADP change. Just anyone at the top of the list surprising, or anyone who want to mention a little bit more in depth?
Not necessarily surprising, but Noah Fant is a player that I've been clicking on a little bit more on my own end, and I think it's because people, I think, are coming around on Seattle's offense, kind of regressing and being a little bit more productive this season. And Fant, relative to like other tight ends outside of like the top, whatever you want to call it, 6, 7, 8 guys, has an extremely healthy role, and maybe even a stronger role than some of these guys that are getting drafted ahead of him, like Luke Musgrave, Cole Kmet, Pat Fryermuth. So I think that's what's kind of, those are the forces at play, pulling him specifically upward. And I do think I kind of buy into that move there. At this point here, early July, Demario Douglas, there's been some reports he's by far looked like the most productive receiver on the Patriots. I think everybody's expecting D-Rob, Demarcus Robinson, to be the primary wide receiver 3 there for the Rams. So Not too much surprising here. And also, these aren't like drastically large moves at this point, Chuck. 2 to 5 spots. We're talking about like a quarter to half a round. So.
Yeah, especially these guys are all in the double-digit rounds. Like Rashi Rice continues to move up. It's back into the 60s, up to 68. I'm still picking him basically every draft at ADP. I think he's going to continue to go up. Pacheco's also up. And I believe, wasn't Hollywood Brown up as well?
We got Cat Mahomes here. This is fantastic. What a name. Haven't seen that one before.
Cat Mahomes?
Yeah, you see that there?
Nice. It's a good one. Yeah, he's new to the site too. We're going with CD Lamb. I will shout out you for joining this draft in stealth mode because I got the number 2 pick. Maybe I wouldn't have if you didn't join. So good luck to you on getting second.
Hey, I think if we go back to the pods we were in last year, you've got some catching up to do here, my friend. I just figured I'd help us push this thing along tonight. So I have no problem doing something like this, Chuck. We've talked about this before, especially if I end up like I'm still kind of very early in building my portfolio. So I am actually going to click on Amon-Ra ahead of Justin Jefferson here because I think straight up I like Amon-Ra over Justin Jefferson this year.
I'm fine with that. Amon-Ra is one of the guys I'm concerned I'm not getting enough of because I do like Justin Jefferson over Amon-Ra, but I like both of those guys over Jamar Chase. But I'm like just now getting to the point where I want to not take Jamar Chase in number 4 because I already have enough.
And now that I look at what I'm trying to do here, obviously I got a good idea what you're trying to do with CD. 49ers in week 17, Bears week 16, Bills week 15 with Amon-Ra St. Brown. I imagine we went back to your kind of flow charts, your visuals. A lot of the most common builds with Amon-Ra St. Brown are going to be the ones where someone takes at least one of like Debo or Brandon Ayuk here in round 2. So like if we're thinking about building a little bit differently, going a different direction there here in the second round is probably something I should at least somewhat be considering. I'm sure since we're all aware of the correlation game, all the 49er players are going to have strong correlation with Amon-Ra St. Brown, but I'd wager that someone like George Kittle, for example, is probably not as highly owned as those other two with him.
So I have it up on the screen now for Amon-Ra, and it's actually the opposite. Ayuk at 9%, Debo at 10%, Kittle at 15% is the highest owned correlation. Those numbers are actually all lower than I would have expected for each of them individually.
This is the importance of looking at the data, right? Because it is completely the opposite of what my lean was. And I don't know if, like, had you not looked at this, if you would have agreed or disagreed with me, but that is definitely interesting. I did not.
No, I would have thought the same. Yeah, that Ayuk and Debo were definitely overowned with Amon-Ra, but like people are taking more Jonathan Taylor, more Saquon than they are with the Week 17 pairs, which seems incorrect.
Ayuk, I could see being a matter of like him just not making it back to you, but the others are surprising. So,
anyway. And here showing a guy from the middle rounds, you can see it's still weighted towards the middle more, but guys are getting to the extremes a little bit more than they are from the 1 in 12 spots.
We advocated for reaching an ADP before we got into the draft here, and GDE 684 here obliged us by going with a chain and pairing him with Puka Nacua here. Very interesting.
I've gotten a chain at 32-33 in the past few days, so that felt pretty good. So I had Drake London as the cover boy today, and it sounds like we both came to a realization about Drake London in Atlanta over the weekend or something. We both saw some pieces of information. Talk to me about Drake London.
I want to give credit to like the proper author. Unfortunately, off the top of my head, I don't recall who it was. I believe it was one of the contributors at Established to Run, one of the fine companies here in the fantasy space. But basically talking about, it was like a yes or no, do you expect Drake London to see 130 targets this year? And I do think if you look at the projected passing volume in Atlanta with Kirk Cousins under center, Drake London had like a 24% target share last year. And I think back of the envelope math, I have that as 134 targets.
You know you're on the clock, right?
Yes, I do know that I'm on the clock here, and I'm going to take Saquon Barkley. Anyway, so with 134 targets, I mean, we got a player we're expecting to get roughly 80 to 90 receptions, 1,000 to 1,100 receiving yards, and like in the neighborhood of like 6 to 8 touchdowns. London in the like early to mid second round, probably a player that we want to be a little bit more interested in. Obviously, his ADP kind of spiking a little bit here at the end of the first round, and I think that is a function, Chuck, of what I was just talking about. We have a very popular company and established a run touting Drake London right now, so we're probably going to see his ADP creep up as a result.
Yeah, and they talked me into him, so I'm going to start adding a little more Drake London after I have not wanted to draft him. And same stuff kind of applies to Kyle Pitts as well. And then Darnell Mooney and Rondale Moore. Been adding a little bit at the end of drafts. We have Geek Hippie in the chat. Any Bears worth drafting early?
Well, hopefully. Bears worth drafting early? I think you're going to answer that question for us potentially here.
I'm going to take DJ Moore over the Week 17 correlation with Devonta Smith.
And is that because of... I did the same thing right before you with taking Saquon over Debo, and I think it's because I am trying to think a little bit more about building a little differently than our opponents, like we just talked about before we started the contest here. Okay, back to me here. Now that I have kind of an anchor RB, which I will admit is still the way that I prefer to build teams, I'm going to go with DK Metcalf here. I still want to get a healthy amount of exposure to these high ADP wide receivers. And I mean, in the third round, Metcalf feels like he has a really good chance to beat that ADP this year as the primary threat in Seattle.
Yep. I've been off DK Metcalf, but I'm taking pretty much everybody this year. So all the Metcalf.
And the player that I have been like abusing in this range, Chuck, now that we're both off the clock for a little bit so we can talk freely about this, Kyren Williams. I think he's my highest exposed player right now, which is a little scary if we both buy into the Blake Corum hype. I will concede that. But I guess I'm right with you there. I don't either. But in the third round, I think the one thing I'm going to have to force myself to do a little bit more at running back throughout the rest of the summer, Chuck, is actually click on Derrick Henry in this range because I'm not doing that nearly enough.
Yeah, I've started. So I was at like probably 1% Derrick Henry through my first 500 drafts, and I've started to click him a little bit more just in case, And then with Kyren Williams, I mean, we know Kyren Williams is good. I'm not going to get scared off of him because Blake Corum could be good. Chances are he's not as good as Kyren was last year, as long as Kyren's healthy enough. Even if he loses a few percent of the snap share to Blake Corum, he's still a smash at pick 33.
I think that there is, this is going to be your prototypical like layup, lazy best ball bro take. I understand this, but I'm still going to put it out there for everybody. If you're worried about the threat to Kyren's volume workload throughout the season in like your typical home league where you have to set your lineup, like I get the Kyren fade in those kind of situations, but here in where we don't have to worry about setting lineups, where we're just chasing ceiling weeks throughout the season, Kyren is just a screaming buy, I would say, at this range. If he's going to have, 78% of team rushes, which I think is what he had last year, you smash that in the third round all day. So he's got more projected touches than basically all of the running backs being drafted ahead of him right now than CMC and arguably Bijan, right? So I think it's pretty easy to click on him in this range.
Are you pretty comfortable clicking on Kyren? Let's say you get Breece Hall and Ayuk in the second round. Are you comfortable taking that second stud running back?
Yeah. There are still some pass catcher values in the middle to the later portions of the draft, Chuck, where I'm not going to shy away from getting a couple of these high-end running backs together. And then going back to the combinations of players, the data itself kind of showed us that is something the field isn't doing. The field isn't really going for 2 or 2+ high-end running backs. So those builds will be somewhat unique. And just to talk about the other side of the coin there for a minute, because someone watching this may be thinking to themselves or trying to make the argument to the screen or maybe even leaving a comment in the chat. Well, some of those combinations are lower owned because people have studied the data and the data hasn't shown those to be strong combos and winning lineups. I'd still argue we don't have enough information across enough seasons to know what is truly optimal, and it's probably going to take multiple human lifetimes for us to know that. So I think in a large field tournament like Ball Mania V specifically, we should still lean into the uncertainty there and do I guess somewhat the opposite of what our peers are doing, right?
Yeah, and kind of going back to what we were talking about before we started the draft, it's like if everyone else is just drafting 2 receivers after drafting Brees Hall, I don't know, 10-1, 12-1 receivers versus running backs being drafted, it's not that big of a chance. Like the chances of the wide receivers working out more is higher. I don't know if that made sense. But not as much as the field is drafting those builds. We're talking about a few percentage added points added to your advance rates, but the field is just not going the other route enough.
All right, coming to you here. Speaking of high-end running backs, that's disappointing. The one that I was hoping that would be there for you came off the board. Maybe you felt differently. You looking at any of these guys here?
This is like the toughest spot for me here because I usually love the front end picks, but none of like I would have taken ETN if he was still there, but like I don't know, McLaurin, Trey McBride. Not going to take Mark Andrews this time. Probably just go McLaurin, 4 straight receivers. I don't love McBride, and I guess I already have enough combos of McBride with CeeDee Lamb. That's what these numbers here are. My overall ownership: first round combos, second round combos, third round combos. Just hoping your boy makes it back.
That's all right. I'll survive. Nope. Wow. Cat Mahomes just completely blew us away here with that choice. Anyway, I am okay with getting a player like Lamar here in the 4th round because I think all of these elite quarterbacks in this range, Chuck, are pretty close in value. And yeah, I think kind of the chalk move here is going to be people are going to try to get the Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews combination in round 4 and 5 has been pretty easy to this point in the year to do that. I still think even if you miss out on Zay Flowers, there are plenty of other opportunities that are going to be lower owned, hopefully, with Lamar Jackson that we can look at. Maybe Rashad Bateman, even a guy who wasn't like super popular really, I guess, in any traditional draft-based fantasy contest, but was in like DFS, definitely in single game DFS. Talk about like late round flyers in a contest like this. I'm talking myself into like Nelson Aguilar as an 18th round pick with the Ravens again. I have a feeling he's still going to play a pretty large role for them.
I'm getting that exposure with Devontae Walker when I need it. I haven't taken Aguilar yet, but that's like might be the second time he's come up on stream. So give me a couple weeks and I'll be slamming him in the last round.
So 5 receivers in a row. Not against it, but how does this change your mindset moving forward?
I feel pretty good at receiver. I took Chris Godwin because he's not drafted as much with CeeDee Lamb, and I'm having a tough time getting to Trey McBride here. So just going along with the theme of the show, like lesser drafted combos, and then I don't know, dude. Sometimes Kenneth Walker falls to 70. Like that feels pretty good for an RB1. So I'm just gonna slam running backs here. Probably pick up a quarterback, and it looks like I'm probably punting tight end. Keenan Allen, and back to Geek Hippie's question about any Bears worth drafting early. I love Keenan Allen. I'm pretty sure you love Keenan Allen at his ADP too.
Yeah, I can't stop clicking on Keenan Allen. It's a bit of a problem. It's an addiction that I have at this point. But in all seriousness, I do not buy this giant gap between Moore and Keenan Allen, and it's kind of similar, Chuck. I like all these players, by the way. I'm not saying I dislike any of them. It's kind of similar to me in the difference in price between Evans and Godwin. Yes, the guys being drafted higher, I think we expect them to have slightly more opportunities, slightly larger roles. But I think that when you look at the data at the end of the season, it's going to be closer than you think. And I feel like these ADPs for these combos should be a little closer than they are. So I'm happy to do what you and I both did here in round 5 and take Chris Godwin and Keenan Allen pretty much all day in this range.
Yeah, I'm actually like that's one of the players I'm surprised how much I've been drafting because it's just such an easy click, and I don't realize I'm more than double the field on Keenan Allen basically across all formats. It's I guess it's medium risk due to his age, but the reward is top 10 receiver.
And while we were talking about Drake London specifically earlier, as Kyle Pitts comes off the board here in the 5th round, we probably should be adjusting our expectations across the board for the Falcons. passing attack with Kirk Cousins under center, even if for some unforeseen reason Michael Penix Jr. has to play. I think with Arthur Smith out of the fold now in Atlanta, some of the personnel changes that they've had on offense, bringing Rondale Moore to play more of a full-time role at receiver as well. We should probably be a little bit more interested in these Falcons players, right?
Yeah, I think so. And that's probably one of the teams I'm going to focus on adding a little bit more, especially those guys that are free. Like Rondell Moore is free. Darnell Mooney's kind of free. Still goes in what, the 14th round, maybe?
Darn. That was who I wanted. Yeah, Mooney's pick 148. Rondell Moore, 18th round pick. Okay, what would I like to do here? Would it be goofy to take CJ Stroud? Yes, because I already have enough players there. Okay, what am I going to do here? We're going to do something unconventional and just take the next best wide receiver. The only reason that's unconventional is there's really no Tennessee correlation in this lineup. But I will say I have been taking Ridley over Hopkins with the Titans, and I don't really have any Hopkins yet, so I'm fine with mixing him in here.
I was doing that. I was taking Ridley basically over every time over Hopkins, and now I'm taking Hopkins at ADP and skipping on Ridley most of the time. But I do like them both at ADP. I feel a little bit better about Hopkins. And then Geek Hippie, has Hollywood Brown's value gone up because of the possible Rice suspension?
I think the short answer is yes. The short answer is definitely yes, but I think it's just there's if you go back and look at how Kansas City spread the ball out on offense, they didn't really have wide receivers that were like quote unquote worth their cost in fantasy. I think we remember speaking ad nauseum last year about Bengals Chiefs combos here in Best Ball Mania and having a ton of players like Kadarius Toney. Sorry to open old wounds here, buddy. Marquez Valdez-Scantling, some of those wide receivers, and they just all were like completely not worth it. I think the expectation is almost the opposite now with the pass catchers in Kansas City, Chuck. I don't see anyone clicking on Sky Moore, Kadarius Toney. Everyone is clicking on Hollywood Brown, Rashee Rice, and Travis Kelce. And I think kind of people are voting with their dollars. They think that's where the targets are going to be consolidated this year in that offense, whereas last year it was a little bit more wide open.
Yeah, and it's like all of the Chiefs are kind of up in ADP, and I don't know, they were bad last year. People coming around to the idea that they might be better. They're probably all a little bit underpriced, I think.
What do you think about Aaron Jones?
I did just pass up on him right now, and he had some pretty great correlations with my team, but I do think he's a value at ADP.
This is a player that I haven't taken at all yet. And I have correlation reasons as well throughout the playoffs with the Seattle Seahawks and the Chicago Bears. So mixing him in here after missing out on Justin Jefferson from Minnesota. Jordan Addison, I don't think is a player that was going to be on my roster here either. He may have already gone. Just kind of makes sense. But more importantly, connecting back to the theme of the beginning of the show, I know that I don't have a lot of lineups in general with Aaron Jones in it. I don't feel like the field has a lot of lineups with Aaron Jones in it. I feel like there is an expectation he's not going to be as productive as he was in Green Bay. I seem to remember Aaron Jones's ADP last year was in the fourth and the fifth round, and we've lost a couple of rounds of ADP there. So this is a player who could be in a similar, if not better, kind of role for touches here with the Vikings. So I'm happy to kind of get him here in the seventh round and start clicking him a little bit more.
Well, his opening ADP was like late 50s, early 60s, and now he's fallen 20 spots, and I don't really understand why. Because I mentioned this before, I was comfortable clicking on him when he was at pick 60, but now that he's at pick 80, I'm a little bit more apprehensive. So,
Ty Chandler, I think, is kind of the driving factor. I know his ADP isn't like super high, but you have two guys that are going in the first 150 picks in a draft. That can be a sign of some risk in a backfield. It's the same conversation to, I guess, less of an extreme with Kyron and Blake Corum, right? I think that's part of the equation here.
Well, Ty Chandler was my highest exposed player overall I think he probably still is right now, but I'm not taking him as much. The percentage is going down as his ADP climbs, and I'm not necessarily taking more Aaron Jones because of it, but maybe that's something that I should be doing. That kind of goes for all of my zero RB targets too. Like Marshawn Lloyd is up in ADP. It's getting a little tougher to click on him. I think Bucky Irving's staying the same. Khalil Herbert fell. Joel McLaughlin's coming up a little bit. I was hoping James Conner made it back to me at 95, but nope.
The Jaylen Warren ADP rise is going to be a phenomenal kind of thing to track. I think now that we're in July, we should probably address that. There's going to be more and more content out there. There's going to be more and more people consuming fantasy football content as they get ready for kind of their regular home leagues, and I guess what the beak and dip their toes into these waters as well here on Underdog. Jaylen Warren has been like put out there as like the poster child for the quote unquote best zero RB roster candidate. So I would expect that we're going to continue to see him go higher and higher throughout the rest of the summer here. And the only other, I guess, part of this that is interesting tonight is you actually went the other way here by taking his teammate Najee Harris in the last round.
Way ahead of ADP. Yeah. So with Jaylen Warren, Pat Kerrane's site, he was the winner of Best Ball Mania 3. Legendary upside is super duper duper high on Jaylen Warren. And I think Established the Run is also high on Jaylen Warren. And those are the two rankings that most people are using. And so I'm not saying that they're necessarily wrong, but those are the chalk rankings. And if the chalk is that Jaylen Warren should be going at the same ADP as Najee Harris, I don't know. It feels wrong because their argument is it's a bet on talent. Jaylen Warren is more talented than Najee Harris, but when the coaching staff very, very clearly prefers Najee Harris, I just don't think it matters as much.
Yeah, we got to go with. It doesn't matter what we. It matters a little bit. I'm not going to write it off completely. It doesn't matter how we're evaluating the talent. To your point, it matters how the coaches are and how they're deploying that talent. And we've got plenty of information from Mike Tomlin and the Steelers brass that Najee Harris is going to get the rock early and often in that offense as long as he's healthy. So I think we've got to continue to project it that way.
Mm-hmm.
How often is, I guess what I want to ask you is with like your high end first round wide receivers here, how often is the field pairing Dak with CeeDee Lamb in your drafts, Tyreek with Tua, et cetera, et cetera? Is it higher or lower than you thought it was going to be?
Dak is 50%. That's higher than I would have thought, but I guess it makes sense because his ADP lines up very well with CeeDee Lamb. I can check Amon-Ra after I make my pick. That's a good question though. That's a really good one to look at. Very high correlation with QB ones with their wide receiver ones in terms of advance rate, and this fell perfectly to take Jake Ferguson. So let's take a look. Amon-Ra with Jared Goff. Only 36% of Amon-Ra teams draft Jared Goff. So
that's 4.5 times over average ownership, right? That's probably still that's high. I don't know if that's higher than I thought it was going to be. You obviously have the incentive to do it. Okay. So that's probably, I think, a better baseline than maybe like the Dak Prescott is. Expect quarterbacks to be like 4 times as owned on rosters where you have their wide receiver one is probably like a fair estimate, I guess. Back to me here, and I don't think I have a ton of this player. Wow, I'm tempted to go with a tight end here because I really, really love the value that's right here. But I'm going to go with Romeo Doubs because I need some Packer correlation with a lot of this NFC stuff I've got going on in the playoffs. And I really like Romeo Doubs. Saw Romeo Doubs blow up in the playoff weeks for the Packers. And that's something that, look, I think we look at it, we're aware of it. But like your average fantasy player, when they're studying what happened last year, they're not necessarily incorporating the playoff stats as much. And you look at Green Bay forcing the ball somewhat to Doubs in the playoffs, like that's a somewhat anecdotal thing that I always take away year in and year out, postseason, Chuck. Those are the players that teams trust the most. I feel like going into a new season, I feel pretty good about them having a pretty consistent and maybe even a larger role after a successful playoff run.
Oh, I absolutely agree. Yeah, I definitely buy into things like that and just late season production.
I think my favorite tight end in this range, I was looking at David Njoku. I mean, he's another player who saw a pretty large role change in Cleveland in the second half of the season and through the wild card round in their playoff game. I love him in this range. I know obviously Brock Bowers is the hot new thing, and obviously you had incentive to take Ferguson there, but here in the 9th, 10th round, David Njoku feels like one of the best buys, not just at tight end, but on the board.
Yeah, I'm usually pretty happy having David Njoku as my tight end one if I don't have a tight end yet. I am trying to draft less Deshaun Watson though. It just feels like I have enough already, and I don't want to have too much because it is kind of scary. But the reward is very high. Excuse me. Uh, get Shreked, bruh. Wants to know would you'd rather have Dubes over Bowers come fantasy playoffs?
Which team is more likely to be? Short answer, yes. I think the Packers are going to be better than the Raiders. Bowers could have a good role at the tight end position, but the way I have it projected right now, I think there's still some good value that I don't have to pay as much for at the tight end position. And I think Dobbs has a chance to be like a top two weapon in the Packers offense. So here in kind of this format, looking at playoff correlations too, on the particular roster that I'm drafting out of the 5 hole, I don't really have any incentivized reason to chase a Las Vegas player. So that's another reason I wasn't necessarily looking at it here. If I had playoff week correlation with Brock Bowers on the roster, which means, like some Saints, Jaguars, and Falcons players, of course, I would have been more interested in him here. I'm thinking a lot more about those game environments in this format because I do think that's still important for us to be considering here. I hope that makes sense, whether you agree or disagree. Hope you understand what I'm saying.
I agree.
I appreciate your support, my friend.
What about Dontavion Wicks here? You have any opinions on him going this high?
I don't feel the thing about Green Bay this year is feeling a lot like, I'm not talking like Super Bowl odds or anything like that, but feeling a lot like the weapons on Kansas City last year, right? There's a ton of these guys that are going in the middle of the draft here, starting with Christian Watson down here to Dontavian Wicks. And I think I've talked about it a couple of other times. I have another Packer wide receiver that I kind of prefer in this range, and that is Bo, or not in this range, just in general, Bo Melton. Bo Melton's a player that I'm trying to get a little bit more of. We talked about this player as a really strong zero RB target. I think in one of our very first shows together in late April or early May. Happy to get Devin Singletary in the 10th round here.
I wasn't sure if that was on purpose.
No, it was.
Okay.
I had was looking at some playoff correlation with Lamar Jackson with Devin Singletary in the first round there, so that was a reason I was looking at that.
Nice. I love Devin Singletary at his ADP, so be thrilled if I get Dallas Goedert here, even though I just took Jake Ferguson.
I bet that's not a combination a lot of people have. So
yeah, and I'm looking at just full playoff correlation with my quarterback. I can be done at tight end for once, not have to tack on Jelani Woods this time. Thrilled. Adonai Mitchell went kind of early, 97. Jerome Ford, 121.
That's the Cat Mahomes again. Probably best name in here by far. He did take Anthony Richardson in the 5th round, so I guess I kind of get that.
I'm on Downs over Adonai Mitchell.
I think we're aligned there. But if he's on the Adonai Mitchell side, I understand why he did what he did, even if it's not something I would have done. Almost like somewhat putting kind of my foot in my mouth here, just to go back to the last question about Bowers over Dobbs. I still love Jacoby Myers in this range. My highest exposed wide receiver overall. got him projected for double-digit fantasy points at receiver, and I really don't think at this stage of a draft contest that there's any other wide receiver that you can project for that. So I think he's an awesome pick here. I am going to pass on that, and I'm going to go with Dalton Schultz at tight end for Week 17 correlation with Lamar Jackson. I think you have the kind of chalkier Jackson-Andrews stack. I don't think people are going to be trying to pair the opposing tight end with Jackson as much in Week 17. So I feel like that's a pretty good low-owned combo.
Yeah, and it's like it kind of feels like Dalton Schultz is a tier break after Goddard and Njoku, and some people probably have Goddard the tier below Njoku too. But if I have my tight end one, Dalton Schultz, Cole Kmet, I'm trying to come around on Pat Freiermuth, not quite there yet, but it doesn't feel terrible. I know I'm pretty much always going to have 3 tight ends on those teams, but Dalton Schultz is super undervalued.
You make a good point here. I think Schultz is kind of the last guy I'm willing to take where I tell myself, okay, I'm comfortable having just 2 tight ends on this team. Mm-hmm. He's definitely, that is where that line is. And unfortunately this year, I think that places Hawkinson below the line, but that's purely just because of the injury concern there. I think if I had a team where I took Hawkinson alongside Schultz, I might be okay with those 2 guys together because I feel like Schultz is going to carry me through the first portion of the season there.
Nice. Yeah, on teams like that, I don't know Houston's bye week off the top of my head, but as long as I'm okay, yeah, and then I'm not worried about it with Hawkinson teams. You're talking about Green Bay. You have anything on Luke Musgrave?
I feel like we got a Packer fan in the chat here, and I do appreciate that. You're a big fan of Tucker Kraft, so
I was.
You were. All right, let's dig into that. So I guess I want to talk about Luke Musgrave through the prism of Tucker Kraft because we saw both of those tight ends be really productive last year when they had the volume and the opportunities. You've got Musgrave going around pick 150 here, which is the 13th round, and Tucker Kraft is basically free, ADP of like 215 right now. Happy to have either one, frankly. I think the stakes are much lower with Kraft, admittedly. But again, just speaks to how very, very spread out the field is here on what we expect to happen with Green Bay this season.
Yeah, I had so much Kraft before, and so I still like him at ADP. I don't want my tight ends to be as concentrated, so I'm trying to get away from him. But I'm not drafting any Musgrave, and so I was hoping you'd talk me into him a little bit. I think I do need to add him a little bit, though.
When he came back from his injury in the postseason, I mean, he pretty much went right back to seeing a decent amount of work. I'd have to, go back to my routes run sheet and really take a look at that. I'm not exactly going to do that while I'm on the clock. Are they making me do this? No, okay. I was going to say I thought Jacoby Myers was still here. I was going to lose my mind a little bit. Let's see. What do I have incentive for? We said we were on this side. So why don't I put it in practice and go with Josh Downs as my 7th receiver here with the Indianapolis Colts. Got Week 17 correlation with Devin Singletary, some Week 16 correlation with DeAndre Hopkins as well. So some playoff week stuff to consider there as well.
And it looks like I am going to get Ty Chandler. No problem. It's like, is Ty Chandler 13-1 to be a better pick than Kendre Miller? Absolutely not, but I can't do it. I don't think Kendre Miller is good.
I unfortunately would have to agree purely based off of I don't think it's a lock that he's good. I'll put it that way. Obviously, he can be good, but he didn't blow me away last year. So that's really what it comes down to. A player that I am not convinced is good or even has a chance to be good is Quentin Johnston. And I almost throw up every single time I even think about clicking on him, Chuck. We are all over the place as a community with this Chargers offense. And I know you're in the area. How are you feeling about the local Los Angeles Chargers this season? How's that wide receiver room going to look?
Well, Josh Palmer came up in ADP kind of drastically, but I'm still okay picking him. I mean, he went ADP 99. I think that's around where he is. I still like him. I still don't mind taking DJ Shark in the last round. I'm just trying to keep my exposures in check. I think I don't know if it was with you. We were talking about Dobbins versus Gus Edwards versus Kamani Vidal, and it's probably Gus Edwards. I don't mind taking shots on Dobbins. Kamani could be a zero. In summary, how can this team possibly be good, dude?
I saw, for those who don't know, I'm local to the New England area, so yeah, I do have a little bit of a Patriots fandom in me, and my heart sank a little bit when I was talking with one of my friends today about realistically who's going to be a worse offense than the Patriots this year, and I really was struggling to come up with an answer to that question. But the Chargers would have to be close just because of the weapons. They have Herbert, obviously, and that's always going to make a big difference having the quarterback. But beyond that, I really don't know what's going to happen in LA this year. Wow. You know what? I mean, I kind of built this team a couple of rounds ago. I'm going to go with Hawkinson, and I'll be done at tight end with Hawkinson and Dalton Schultz. I basically told our thousands of viewers what I was going to do, and they still let me do it. It's unbelievable.
Nice. And so when you were saying about worst offenses just now, I thought of Denver to add to that list. And
Okay.
You asked a question before the stream, what team do you think is going to be better than expected? What teams are going to be worse than expected? I think are basically that. If anyone's watching, if you want to answer that question, go ahead and throw that in the chat. Chris and I both had the same answer for which team we think is going to be worse than expected, or shockingly bad, I think was how you worded it. We said the Bengals.
Right. What is something that would truly shock you? So I don't want I'm not looking for I think the Rams will be good this year. I mean, they made the playoffs last year. I get that, and I'm sure that the win total market is fairly high on teams like that. It's basically this question is, where do you think the market could potentially be way off? I think you and I agree there's a lot of downside risk with Cincinnati, very competitive division, and who knows what happens with Burrow coming off of that injury. On the other side of the question, though, I did say a team that I could see surprising in terms of at least winning more games than you would expect, maybe competing for a postseason spot. The Denver Broncos seems like a team that could have a competitive defense, Chuck, and just be maybe a little bit better on offense than we're expecting. I am at this point on the record as not optimistic about Bo Nix under center, Jarrett Stidham under center for the Denver Broncos. But if it's a type of cohesive team unit where the defense is playing well and they're moving the chains and they're running the football well and the quarterbacks are keeping the offense on schedule, Denver seems like a unit that might have enough talent, especially in a division where we're not really sure who the second best team is behind the Chiefs. Denver could be surprising.
My problem with Denver is just Russell Wilson isn't that bad, right? And is it possible that one of these quarterbacks is better than Russell Wilson? I don't think so.
I wouldn't be, and he was good at one point. I wouldn't be so confident that Russell Wilson isn't bad. I'm sorry to say that. I don't think he's been good for almost 5 years now. So I really think people are buying you're buying a name brand there, right? And you think you're getting a certain quality with Russell Wilson. And I don't think the game is there to back it up anymore. I'm sorry to say for any Wilson fans out there. So maybe that's what my bias is. I'm just not a Russell Wilson guy at this point.
Well, if it's true, that would be great for me. If Justin
Fields
is starting by week 6, dude. Oh man, we're shipping everything this year. Let's see.
This is where the draft just gets gross, dude. But hey, we still gotta play it out. Ben Sinnott is a tight end that I've talked about quite a few times on our shows together, shows with other hosts here at Occupy. But I don't have nearly enough at this point, so I'm going to try to get a little bit more. And beyond Sinnott, I don't have as much Jaden Daniels as I would like to have. Talking about teams that could be good this year, maybe not in a surprising way. I think obviously people are expecting Washington to take a step forward now with their new look offense, and I want much more exposure than I currently have.
I expect to be around the field on Jaden Daniels. Yeah, I usually stay pretty even in all my quarterbacks, though, so I am trying to be cognizant of which guys I'm under on. And Jaden Daniels in the same range as Caleb Williams, Jordan Love, Joe Burrow's falling to pick 100 a lot.
Talk to me about Antonio Gibson and Ray Davis. Who do you prefer in this range at running back?
Well, I mean, it feels like Ray Davis is probably the safer pick because he's younger, but Antonio Gibson, I mean, we were on him last year. I think he's still fine. I think he gets carries even when Ramondre's healthy.
I decided to go with Bateman just to have a little bit of correlation with Lamar Jackson. Obviously, Bateman's ADP has come up a ton since BBM opened in April because people expect him to be, I guess, outside of Zay Flowers, like the number 2 receiver there in that offense, and a little bit unclear beyond that. But I can feel pretty good about putting receiver to bed now on this roster, Chuck.
Nice. All right. Well, I'm going to do my absolutely standard stack. The only problem with taking Baker on this team is I don't like it that 2 quarterbacks are meeting in a playoff week, and I can't take Geno with Ken Walker. So we'll take Baker Mayfield, and we'll probably just take Bucky Irving and finish out my running back position.
So at this point, I am on track looking at, going back to the beginning of our draft board here. Got Amon-Ra with the 5th pick instead of Justin Jefferson. I've actually built a roster here that correlates far better with Minnesota and Justin Jefferson's playoff slate of games. Conversely, with Amon-Ra St. Brown, I don't have any exposure to Buffalo in week 15 or San Francisco in week 17. I actually kind of like this based off of what we were talking about, Chuck, because I feel like the way most owners are attacking the draft is once they get their first player, they're kind of catering their build around that. And I think what we discovered looking at some of the data that you put on the screen at the beginning of the show is that if we are willing to be a little bit different and maybe not do something, maybe I'm taking it to an extreme here. I will say that. But if we're willing to be different than what the field is doing, we're setting ourselves up to have far more unique combinations at the top of our rosters in those playoff weeks, especially in like a large final like Ball Mania 5 has, if we're lucky enough to advance to that final with one of these rosters. So I am kind of excited about kind of this new way of thinking about things. Amon-Ra St. Brown is the type of player that should have a ton of standalone value on any given roster. I don't think I need to force Jared Goff combinations, Debo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle combinations with Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Well, especially even more so when you have a Lamar Jackson type quarterback. I mean, Goff just doesn't matter anymore most of the time.
I did double stack this team with Metcalf and Lockett, so I am going to go with Geno Smith as my second quarterback.
And I kind of made a panic pick, Noah Fant, so that's unfortunate.
All right.
I can still probably just take 2 receivers and a running back and be done. So I took 5 receivers to start, and I haven't taken a single one since. I don't mind this, depending on which receivers I get in the last round, especially if they're rookies. And I did want to mention, you brought up Ben Sinnott. So his ADP here was what, 170? 160 he went here. Over on Drafters, his ADP is 200. So if you like Ben Sinnott, I have a ton of him over there.
Definitely worth looking at the data across these providers too and figuring out the spots you can leverage just in general. Speaking of providers, before we get out of here, we cannot let a show go by without talking about how Underdog Fantasy is both the easiest and the best place to play fantasy sports contests. You'll see our promo code on the screen here, Occupy2. I believe they're still running the 50% deposit match promo for first-time depositors, where you can get up to $250 matched on your first deposit. One of the best offers that we've seen in this space. And it's not just these NFL season-long draft contests that you can play here on Underdog. You've got some pick'em contests or champions peer-to-peer fantasy stat slip contests that you can put together. And there's promo stats that Underdog puts out time to time. I believe we have a Gunnar Henderson home run derby over half a home run, which I think is pretty much a lock to happen, Chuck, that we maybe compare with a stat that we like when we get a little bit closer to the home run derby next week. I think last week when you and I were on the show together, I had a promo stat available that we put something out live on that actually hit. So for anybody who tailed that, we're basically on a 100% success rate in terms of touting picks for slips here on Underdog Fantasy, which once again, definitely since they've come into the fray here, one of my favorite places to play. And as always, super happy to be partnered with them to bring these shows to you guys.
We went 2 for 2 last week. Gave out a play with Derek on the following stream as well. So We are still batting 100. I was going to try to find something to pair with it, but there wasn't anything good right now. I figure we'll have a few days to, a few streams, I should say, before the Derby to find a good pair for it.
Thought that he was going to make it back to me, but that is all right. I still only have 3 tailbacks on this roster. I've got pretty much everything else that I want. So I'm not. It's not that I'm exclusively looking at running backs, Chuck, but I do want running backs. Man, I don't feel like Khalil Herbert's going to be on the Bears by the end of the season. It's a little bit of a panic pick here. I'm going to go with someone significantly ahead of ADP, but players that are on good teams, something I try to keep my mind focused on. CEH could all of these kind of final 3 rounds. It's kind of a wash at this point. I'm not counting on these players to crack my starting lineup that much. I like having a little bit of exposure to Kansas City's offense. Anything happens to Pacheco, seems like CEH slides in on early downs, so this is fine.
CEH, also one of the guys I was not comfortable clicking early on in draft season, but now, if I need a running back, absolutely. And I did something kind of weird. I have a triple stack on Dallas, Zeke, CD, and Jake Ferguson. So we're going to just get the double stack on Tampa Bay and hope these 2 teams are good.
All right. Cool.
Got the rookie Jalen McMillan, just like I said. And
a player that just came off the board that I think on a previous show, your exact words to me were, I will have 0% of Odell Beckham Jr. You still feel that way? Or okay.
Oh yeah. There's 13 18th rounders I'll take before OBJ.
Wow.
Give me Josh Reynolds. Give me KJ Osborne. Give me Calvin Austin.
Calvin Austin. Wow. I have OBJ down bad here. Nelson Aguilar, maybe?
Over OBJ? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Give me Parker Washington over OBJ.
Wow. We're going to find a line where you would take OBJ. Mac Hollins with the
I'll
Bills?
take Mac Hollins. I've seen him score a long touchdown before.
Jake Bobo with the Seattle Seahawks.
The problem is I played preseason NFL last season, and I'm pretty sure he won me some money. So, yeah, we're on the Bobo train. If Lockett and JSN go down, he's stepping up.
I guess this is a good, as you take Devontae Walker, I already went with Bateman, but love Walker in this range as well. Something that is worth people being aware of. This is really the only range in the board, Chuck, where you're going to be able to select players that are going to have a pretty good chance of not being 100% owned in this large field tournament. So, like, are there guys here with like fringe undrafted ADPs right around pick 216 that we think could be game changers that we want some more exposure to? Like, in other words, who are some of the Occupy Fantasy endorsed plays here that the field isn't necessarily on? Like, I've talked about a couple of them already, like a Sky Moore. Like, is there anybody down here that you have been on that the field isn't necessarily on that you'd like to share with our viewers?
I don't know about game changer, but KJ Osborne, I've mentioned before, as a guy I think is going to be on the field for the Patriots. He's going to produce some fantasy points. I don't know what the ceiling is there. A.T. Perry, I'm intrigued by because his ADOT is insane, but kind of so is everybody else's on New Orleans. None of their top 3 receivers have an ADOT below 10. Someone's got to run those underneath routes. I don't know if he's capable of it. Khalif Raymond has really great playoff correlations being on Detroit. DJ Shark. I like Josh Reynolds in Denver. What if he's better than Marvin Mims and Troy Franklin? I don't mind taking shots on like fringe receivers like Trey Palmer and Trey Tucker. Calvin Austin.
Yeah, I think a player I mentioned to you before we went live here was Alan Lazard with the New York Jets. Like, I don't think it's completely like a lock that he's going to be relegated to the second unit behind these guys that are being picked ahead of him all summer long here. And, with a pre-existing kind of relationship / chemistry with Rodgers, like Lazard does not want to be super clear here. The context is 18th round pick that could beat his value and maybe be kind of an interesting player that you want to sneak into some playoff rosters if they do have a bigger role. Lazard feels like he's starting to stand out to me, Chuck, as someone that I want some exposure to down in this range. Who else down here? How about Tutu Atwell with the Rams? I feel like no one's talking about him. We talked about Downs and Adonai Mitchell. What about Alec Pierce? He also feels like kind of a forgotten wide receiver right now.
I took a look at Alec Pierce actually a couple days ago. In 18 round drafts, I'm not sure I'll be getting there, but in 20 round drafts, I could see myself getting a few percent. Yeah, it just he seems like he's a guy that can score a long touchdown, or he has before anyway. And someone mentioned Bo. We talked about Bo Melton already earlier in the stream. I think he's pretty great last round pick too. Are you completely off MVS now?
I don't think I guess similar to the Jets, I don't think we can say with any high degree of confidence what's going on in Buffalo. ADP is on Keon Coleman, Curtis Samuel. Man, who's the other one there going pretty high? Keep me honest here. I just completely blanking out. I think some of those other guys like Chase Claypool, MVS, Mac Hollins, like absolutely could mix in and be a little bit more valuable. I have no real reason to consider any of these guys. I'm closing out this draft with 3 late round running backs that are kind of staples for me at this point, Chuck, that I think could be kind of breakout players due to injury or role change. And it's CEH, Audric Estime, and Keaton Mitchell. These are some of my favorite late round dart throws with upside at running back.
And there is one running back I'm comfortable taking that's left on the board. So I guess 2, but I prefer 1. So we'll see if I get him. Was there anyone you'd add to that wide receiver list that I just named?
What do you think about Van Jefferson with the Steelers?
Okay, I'm glad you brought this up. Yeah, I had something on Van Jefferson, actually.
This is the first show in the history of the world in 2024 where we've been excited to talk about Van Jefferson as we close it out. Let's hear it.
Someone brought him up on the stream I was on with Brian because we were talking about that offense, right? I think I mentioned he's on the Steelers, right? Because I mentioned Calvin Austin, whatever. And I said that I had been drafting a bunch of Van Jefferson the previous season until I did a show with Chris, and he made some kind of comment like Van Jefferson's the worst pick in the history of fantasy, and I never drafted him again. And so, if we're back in on Van Jefferson, let me know.
I think the context is the talent in the receiver room. And when Van Jefferson was stuck behind Cooper Kupp and the great Puka Nacua, because we were completely confident how that was going to kind of pan out with Tyler Higbee at tight end, like it felt like it was pretty clear where the ball was going in LA with Van Jefferson. That was a big reason why I was out on him. And then when he moved over to Atlanta, kind of was the same thing. When we look at the current Steelers depth chart after George Pickens, I'm sure this is kind of what you talked about with Brian and others. Like, where is this ball going, right? At wide receiver, if we exclude Freiermuth and we leave him out of the mix. I think the current thinking is that Van Jefferson is clearly the other outside receiver. And Roman Wilson, their third round pick, wide receiver that they took here in this past April's draft, should be in the slot. But, I don't think that's locked in. I think the fact that Jefferson could be one of those starters, though, and the fact that he goes significantly later than Roman Wilson is probably bad. I don't think that's good. So I think if we're looking at 18th round picks to mix in at receiver, guys that are going to have a 5, maybe I'm being too high, maybe a 0 to 20% ownership range in these large field contests. What if Van Jefferson is a guy in the playoffs that catches a couple of long touchdown passes from Justin Fields or Russell Wilson, and that's a player that could actually make a huge difference in your playoff payout. I have no problem mixing him in, because what we're looking for are guys that we think are going to clear the first hurdle of actually staying on the roster that they're on, and then 2, get playing time. And I feel like out of a lot of the guys you can look at down here, Van Jefferson has a pretty good chance to beat both of those hurdles and be on the roster in 2024 for the Steelers. Probably a longer answer than you bargained for, my friend, but that was the Van Jefferson discussion to end the show tonight.
All right. Well, I can add some Van Jefferson now. And I just checked out of the 143 teams he's been drafted twice total on Underdog and drafts I've done. So
he's literally 1%.
Yeah. So it's not a bad one. We appreciate everyone for watching. If you missed the beginning of the stream and you're still here, we had some pretty good info on combos. So definitely go back, check that out. I think we both drafted good teams today. And we'll see you guys on our next stream. Thanks.